secular Saturday, secular Saturday sermon here. So let me just see what this feels like. So today's thought was, rather than Greek and Aristotelian groupings of the abstract concept of logic, and then physics, and then ethics, arguably metaphysics, but I think that's outdated. I'm not going to discuss that right now. So rather than those three categories of logic, physics, and ethics, I'm going to twist them slightly, but make an important difference to that, important change to those three. And we're going to replace one of them. So we're going to go with the pragmatic, more psychosocial, psychoanalytic kind of categorization of knowledge or philosophy. And we're going to go with ethics, physics, and politics. And so politics as a replacement for logic obviously immediately is in danger of making it sound like I don't respect logic or something, or like as if the point is to put the focus on government or on sort of social games or something over logic, but that is not my point. Like, logic is riddled through all of this, but it doesn't need to be its own category. It's just sort of a tool that we use to grapple with philosophy or knowledge, right? And so the reason that I think these three categories are more important is because there's a way of looking at both ethics and physics in a more pragmatic and psychoanalytic kind of practical way that leaves almost like a hole, okay? And so the reason that happens is in ethics, there's a certain way of behaving ethically and being concerned about ethics and sort of asking whether you are being ethical and asking ultimately what is good and productive to do, right? With your time personally, with your social interactions, with everything. And that's just that pragmatic focus of being concerned with what you're doing, right? And not with some kind of abstract idea of ethics, right? And then physics, same thing, like, make sure that your visual, spatial reasoning, your imagination, your understanding of the world is ultimately kind of practical in that it is going back to who you are as a human, your understanding of the world, how you actually function, how your brain works, how you can interact with others. What's the usefulness of these concepts? Does it actually help you when you have a certain visual, spatial understanding of the universe? Does it actually help you to get something done, or are you just sort of writing math down on the board and making sure that it checks out and not actually relating it to a real physical experiment, not actually relating it to your understanding of the world and how it impacts your connection to that world and then your ability to infuse those ideas into other ideas and help those ideas? Are you increasing your relationship to other ideas, or are you just abstractly coming up with concepts? So then there's this whole created there for politics, because it's like, look, there's this aspect of our psychosocial makeup, of the way we conduct ourselves, that is more towards the socio-emotional, right? Sort of away from the physics, sort of away from the imagination and understanding, and more towards the like, okay, I care about what people think of me, how they make me feel, how I make them feel, and so power, potentially, yes, power, the impressions I'm giving, the impressions I'm getting of other people, right? Things like that. So that part of our brains, and that part that some people tend to lean towards more than physics, or vice versa, some people towards physics more than the politics, that part of our brains, though, it's a powerful force, and a powerful part of what it can be to be human, that some people have more than others, sure, but that collectively speaking, and what it is to be human is a very big chunk, of what we are capable of and what we can focus on and things like that. Now, the risks, right? Let's talk about the real practicality and the relationship of these three now. Now that I've outlined the sort of why, if you've gotten something out of that, the sort of why these three, I think, matter, why these cover very important categories of how we think. Now I want to talk about the relationship between the three. And to cut to the chase, kind of, ethics is the best candidate for an umbrella to the other two, an umbrella for all three of them. And here's why. Physics is at risk for being too abstract, right? Whether it's by coming up with a mathematical way, formulaic, sort of algebraic looking way of reducing visual spatial reasoning down to a little formula and then rearranging all that formula and incorporating and substituting and continuing to rearrange, and, you know, until you get so abstract on the board that you're sitting there coming up with, like, you know, string theory like thinking, and you are, frankly, string theory is at risk for being too abstract and not practical. And very much so, you know, in a different mood, I could rant about that and make it sound bad, basically, right? Vilify string theory, not because it's not an interesting way of thinking, I'm sure, in a lot of ways, but because, you know, huge risk for being impractical, huge risk for getting carried away with itself. So that kind of thing, that can happen, whether it's through formula that you write down on boards, or you're just sitting there thinking about visual spatial reasoning to the degree that you sometimes maybe forget whether it is even informing you about other things, or whether you can even verify it through an experiment even, or something like that. So it's at risk for becoming too abstract. And politics is at risk for feeling too, you know, grounded in the social. But what that really means is, in our psychological makeup, is it's at risk for becoming too socio-emotional, or kind of taking you over emotionally, right? You're obsessed with power, or you're obsessed with the impression that I'm making on other people, or you're obsessed with the impressions that other people are making on you, and oh my God, and judging, or you're, you know, just, you become kind of emotionally drained or overwhelmed, or again obsessed, like you, in a parallel way to how you can become obsessed with the abstract thinking of physics. And so those can become split, right? They're not very good at reining each other in and of themselves. They need something that's a broader umbrella, and that is that overall question. That's what ethics is best defined as, probably. That overall question of what is it good or productive to do? And why even think that way? Well, how do you even answer that? A lot of times by relating those other two, or a lot of times by relating maybe other concepts that don't immediately fit under physics or politics, but are just ideas that you're toying with, and you're not necessarily categorizing them right now, but you're trying to relate them at least. Well, by relating things and asking then, well, what is the usefulness of this? How does this relate to other things, right? Those are ethical questions, right, in the most practical sense. And so that's why ethics is the best candidate for sort of organizing the other two, the physics and the politics, the sort of socio-emotional and the sort of, you know, potentially abstract or abstract-like understanding or imagination of how the universe works. Without ethics, you know, you can't rein the other two in, per se, and politics can't rein in ethics or physics, right? Very well. Physics cannot rein in ethics or politics very well. Ethics is the only one that can kind of bring organization and a center to all three. It doesn't work in any other combination or order. So without going into that, we'll just kind of leave that at that. You can think about that for yourself if you want to, but really try to make politics rein in ethics. It's horrible. It's not going to work. Try to make physics in its abstract nature, its danger of becoming abstract, start to inform ethics, or what is it going to do? It's going to end up ignoring ethics. That's what's going to happen. Politics, same thing. It's going to end up ignoring ethics to a greater degree than it is able to incorporate it. And so then what happens? You start getting disorganized. And that's very much what we see playing out in the world, right? You either become this abstract academic understanding-based person, and you sort of start ignoring politics to some degree, and you start ignoring ethics, unfortunately, and that's where it really gets dangerous. Or you become this politician, you start to, you know, oh, well, who cares about physics? Well, what's more important is you're in danger of, oh, who cares about ethics? And that is not good. That is not what you want to happen. Both of them are at risk for, in their own way, ignoring ethics, starting to lose track, forgetting to ask what is good for us to do, and then derailing and sort of losing a sense of organization in our own personal thought processes, and then how we're impacting each other, how we plan society out together, and I mean, things just fall apart. Things fall apart, and so I would argue that a lot of our issues are because we don't center ourselves around ethics enough. We don't organize our thinking in a very clear way like this, and so then we lose track, and we start, making bad business decisions. We start, making bad policies or laws. Really, right? It's happened for sure, historically, or we start to think that we can escape everything and just be abstract thinkers, and that somehow solves the problems. It doesn't. It's really kind of an ignorance of the problems. Politics, though, can do the same thing by focusing on problems or ideas about social impact so much, it actually ends up ignoring the real problems. And it's like you've got to have a center, you've got to have an umbrella for the rest. And that's where ethics steps in and always asks, what is good, what is productive, what do we need to spend our time on? Not necessarily what we should do, because that can be a trap. Not necessarily what we have to do, but just simply open-endedly, what is good, what is productive, what should we spend our time on, like sort of small s should, and not big S should, or what must we do. No, we don't get overwhelmingly obsessed with what is right to the degree that we're trying to force our ideas on other people, but we're actually openly asking what is good. That's the right spirit to remind ourselves to go back to. That is what I would argue is true ethics. So that's why it brings organization to all the other ideas. That's about it. That's my thoughts.